Hello everybody and welcome to Prescott Hill Climb in lovely Gloucestershire. It's a fine, slightly breezy day, but wherever you're watching and listening from, you're very welcome to our first competitive meeting of this crazy year. But gradually things are coming back to normal. We've got a nice, interesting entry running up this famous hill, which has been the home of the Bugatti Owners Club since 1938, and we may be able to show you a bit of a video we produced celebrating the 90th year of the Bugatti Owners Club, which was founded in 1929. Down the hill comes our clerk of the course, Chris Bound, so he's been just checking that everything is ready, and then our first cars will be ready to come up the hill. He's going the wrong way round, he's coming down the hill, so he's going the other way round the famous Ettores bend. Ettore, of course, named after Ettore Bugatti, Mr. Bugatti, and then round Orchard Bend and back down to the start line. So Prescott has been in action for since 1938. It has little changed, although the Ettores loop was introduced in the late 60s, but we have an annual meeting of the Vintage Sports Car Club here every year, and they use the original course, which turns sharp right at Orchard Bend. But our first car is coming to the line, Lee Carter, in this really interesting little Fiat 695 SS Abarth, which, as you can see, is a much modified Fiat 500 twin-cylinder, 695 cc, so bored out by a bit, and you'll wonder why the boot is open, the engine cover is open. If you watched European saloon car racing in the 60s, you'll know that these frantic Abarths had fantastic battles with the Minis, and they always raced with the engine lid open for extra cooling. He's under the bridge at Orchard. We've got a speed trap there, and he's gone through the speed trap at 43 miles an hour, and later on, when we got Sean Gould, for example, well over 110 miles an hour under the bridge and into Orchard Corner. So round Ettores and a little bit of downhill and then uphill to the famous Pardon hairpin bend, and Lee is just making his way along the top, so-called straight, but actually it's not straight at all, and into the notorious S's, which is quite a tricky series of bends, and often things can tend to go wrong there. He'll disappear around the semicircle, and he's followed by Adrian Burrows in a Ford Puma, the original Ford Puma. There's a new one now, but this is the original Ford Puma, under the bridge at 45 miles an hour into Ettores, and a burst of acceleration down the hill and then up towards Pardon. Lots of disagreement about the best line through Pardon. Ex-hill climb champion, multiple champion Roy Lane always said keep about a metre in from the inside edge, but there are various views on that. Adrian into the S's. We've got a time for Lee Carter in the Abarth, 66.99. On the line, Will Goff with this original Sierra Cosworth, 2 litre, the famous whale tail Cosworth, which is incredibly popular now in Japan, and values of these cars have gone shooting up. Time for Adrian Burrows was a 61.24. Here's Will Goff into Ettores. On the line we've got a Hillman Imp. We'll see that in a few seconds' time. Will Goff navigating Pardon. We had a very few drops of rain this morning, so the track started for practice rather greasy and slippery, but I believe it's dried out nicely, although under the S's it often stays a bit damp. Time for Adrian Burrows, 61.24. Will Goff on his way has finished, and his time is 59 No, it's still going, 60.69. Mark Maynard, we saw off the line. Here he is into it, Tories, in this little Hillman Imp. Introduced by the Roots Group in the early 60s to compete with the Mini, with a tiny little aluminium engine in the boot at the back, which was developed by Coventry Climax. It's based on a Coventry Climax design. And the car was developed, a lot of the development was done by Mike Parks, who went on to become a works Ferrari Grand Prix driver. Tragically, he was killed in a car accident on the Autostrada in Italy. Time for Mark Maynard coming up, which is a 56.67, good time for the Imp. On the line is Maggie Richards. Here she is in this classic Renault Clio with 182 horsepower. It's Maggie's first year of hill climbing, so this will be her first competition run up Prescott. Through the bridge speed trap at 45, heavy braking, and the correct late apex for Ed Torres. It's a very easy mistake to make, to go for too early an apex at a Torres, and then you're all wrong for the squirt out of it. We've got on the line James Dockery with his Subaru Impreza. All the advantage of four-wheel drive and low centre of gravity, turbocharged 2-litre engine. Maggie heading towards the finishing line as the Subaru of James Dockery takes off. There you can see on the screen Maggie's time still running as the Subaru 57 considerably quicker through the orchard under the bridge. And time for Maggie Richards, 64.59, and we've got the Abarth back. This time in the hands of Dave Fripp. They're having their first competitive season in this car. So the Subaru heads towards the S's. We'll pick him up in the S's. James Dockery, 57 miles an hour under the bridge. Dave Fripp in the Abarth is underway. There he goes. And James Dockery has to go around the semicircle and then a straight squirt to the finishing line. And his time is a 54.56, quickest run so far today. Now Dave Fripp in the Fiat is facing Lee Carter's time of 66.99, so it's a demon battle between the two of them. These cars are competing in the New Barn Interclub B License Championship, and when we have a pause, I'll explain what a B license is as Dave heads towards the S's. These are the saloon class in the New Barn Championship, and we go on to the sports car class, kicked off by Colin Davis in his Caterham Road Sport. He's through the speed trap at Orchard at 53. The Abarth finishes with 66.45, so he's a bit quicker than his partner. This is Colin Davis in the Caterham. Interestingly, this has got a 1600cc Vauxhall Sigma engine, sort of engine that powers the Vauxhall Corsa, but of course considerably modified for use in the Caterham. His speed under the bridge was pretty much the same as the Subaru. And we'll pick up the Subaru. No, we won't. We'll pick up the Ginetta, G20 Ginetta of John Brunner with the Z-Tech engine. Very pretty car and very effective. We've got a time for Colin Davis in the Caterham of 57.58. John Brunner nicely through Pardon. On the line we've got a lovely original Frog Eye Sprite. We'll see it in a second or two. There it is. Slightly modified. It's got disc brakes. It's got an engine bored out to 1275 rather than the original 998 of the Sprite, but it's such an iconic shape. What a pity, in a way, that the Mark II had to be more conventionally bodied. John Brunner in the Ginetta, a time of 55.26. This is a very sprightly Sprite, isn't it? Nipping round 50 miles an hour under the bridge, which for a little Sprite is quick. Wire wheels, Sprites never came with wire wheels, so that was a modification that you could do in period. Lots of people, like Les Leston, made massive number of modifications and accessories that you could put on your Sprite, one of which of course was wire wheels. So Peter Neal heads towards semicircle, which he's just entering now, 180 degrees, and then back a straight squirt to the finishing line, and off goes Andrew Wilcox in a Caterham Super 7, again 1600cc. Peter Neal in the Sprite 59.04. Andrew Wilcox, another quick run through the bridge of 57, takes the right line through Ed Torres. Maybe a gear change or two before down through the gearbox at Pardon. It's a really interesting hill, Prescott. It demands a great deal of precision and a degree of grit your teeth and go, because parts of it are very quick, particularly as you've seen under the bridge and round Orchard. Andrew Wilcox, time of 53.91. Here's David Rose in this lovely Elan. He was the winner of this championship last year in the Elan. Colin Chapman's classic lightweight little sports car inspired the Mazda MX-5. Came with a soft top or with a fixed head, and this of course, as you can see, is the fixed head version. It's also got fixed headlights. Original Elan had winking headlights. In other words, they came up and down when you turned the lights on. Often they winked unnecessarily, and they were winking at you with just one eye. Lotus Elan with the classic twin cam engine on the Cortina block, and can be modified to produce plenty of power. We've got a time for Andrew Wilcox of 53.91. He was in the Caterham Super 7. David Rose has finished with a 54.96. Here's Rob Guttridge in the first of a convoy of Mazda MX-5s. You can see how the Elan inspired the MX-5. It's become the world's best-selling sports car ever, and again available with a detachable hardtop or a soft top. Although the latest model, soft top or a fixed hardtop, but which collapses into the boot. Trying to think of a better verb than collapses, but you know what I mean. Folds itself back into the trunk of the car if you're listening in the United States. And if you are, welcome. Nice of you to join us from the States. Probably in California, what will it be? It'll be breakfast time, won't it? Just about. So Rob Guttridge, time of 59.02. He's followed by Steve Perry in another MX-5. Quite an early one. MX-5 was introduced into this country in I'll get it right. H-Reg, what was that? 89. 1989. So the MX-5 has been on the market for over 30 years. Brilliant car. Steve Perry into the S's, as Paul Farrow in a pretty blue one takes off from the start line. We'll pick him up probably at Orchard. Here he is under the bridge. Steve Perry in the drop head MX-5 is going to finish with a 66.06. Is Paul Farrow in, I rather like that colour actually, metallic pale blue. quickly into and through the S's. As you can see on the right hand side of the screen, he'll disappear around the semicircle as John Wadsworth in a slightly newer MX-5, Mazda MX-5, leaves the line. This is a 2005 car, so bringing us, it looks almost brand new, doesn't it? But it's 15 years old. Time for Paul Ferro, 58.42. John's speed under the bridge, 53. We've got intermediate times recorded at Ettores and at Pardon, and you can see that he got to Ettores in 17.95. On the line we've got an MGTF, there it is. It's John White in this MGTF with the classic Rover K series engine, producing about 135 bhp. The original MGF had hydroelastic suspension, which meant rubber and water springs, but when they produced the TF, it went back to standard steel springs. And the last few TFs were actually built after MG was taken over by a Chinese company, and they were constructed in China, shipped over in knockdown form to Birmingham, to Longbridge. And in fact it was, I think the TF was the last car made at the famous Austin factory at Longbridge. We got a time for John Wadsworth, and it's 60.10. 60.10. Jamie Stevens well on his way. Jamie's in the MG-ZR. John White's finished in the MG-TF, 63.01. MG-ZR, one of the final little saloons produced by Rover. And lots of people start in hill climbing with a saloon car like this, like the MG-ZR, perhaps graduate to a Caterham, and most of our British hill climb champions have started in either a mini or a small saloon. Now we're going to Porsche. This is the 924, but it's the turbocharged version of the Porsche 924 in the hands of Stephen Cooper. Jamie Stevens in the ZR MG recorded a time of 57.51. Here's the turbocharged Porsche 924 heading into the S's, and we got some drops of rain. Let's hope it doesn't develop into anything serious. Yeah, I'm afraid windscreen wipers going in the hands of Paul Renison in this 944, successor to the 924. Ooh, look at the rain falling. It is a shame. But the 944, a great development of the 924, but with its own Porsche engine, 3-litre Porsche engine, 4-cylinder, but with a balancer shaft, so it's very smooth. And like the 924, has a gearbox linked together with the back axle, so a rear gearbox. And both the 924 and the 944 famous for their wonderful handling characteristics. Steve Cooper in his 924, 58.46. Paul Renison in the SS. As you can see, the moment it's probably psychological, the effect of the rain, because the track is still pretty dry, but it's always awkward when suddenly you're faced on dry tyres with a shower of rain. I don't think it'll last. Porsche Cayman in the hands of Alan McFarlane. Cayman S with a 3.4 flat 6 engine, mid-engine of course. Such a pretty car and so effective. Porsche really got it right with both the Boxster and the Cayman. Time for Paul Renison in the 944 Porsche, 59.07. Alan McFarlane well on his way. Here he is just coming into the S's with the Cayman. This might be quite a quick time. It's a pretty standard Cayman, Alan tells me, and it's followed by Andrew Meredith in another 924. So Alan McFarlane, 59.97. He'll be pleased to be under the 60-second mark. This is a non-turbocharged 924. Andrew Meredith, 2-litre. People tended to sneer a bit at the 924, accusing it of having an engine out of an Audi van, but that's a bit unfair because it was a neat little sports car and sold like hotcakes. So Andrew Meredith, rounding semicircle, heading for the finishing line. It's a 62.01. Interesting car on the line, the Sunbeam Alpine. Quite an early car. And the Alpine really was regarded as a tourer rather than an out-and-out sports car. Very, very popular in the States. Great cruiser in California. The original ones weren't very powerful. This one's got a slightly larger engine than standard. It's still the early body shape with those high rear fins on the back. Later Alpines had those cut down a bit, and modified with wire wheels makes it look really good. It's in beautiful condition, absolutely like brand new. I think I gave you Andrew Meredith's time of 62.01. He was in the Cayman. Simon Firth Bernard in the Alpine, well on his way. And up and leaving the line is Zoe Sherman in her little MR2. Zoe, I think, is in her first season of hill climbing. These little MR2s, nimble little cars, mid-engined of course, not expensive to buy and have a lot of fun with. Simon Firth Bernard in the Alpine recorded a time of 64.19. What can Zoe do? Well, she's got to navigate the S's first. I hope the hill is still dry. I think it probably is. It was a very short shower of rain. And off the line comes the TR4A Triumph of Richard Durrant. Classic Triumph, developed from the TR2 progressively, but still with the 4-cylinder 2-litre Triumph engine, which powered all sorts of different vehicles, mustn't say this, including the Ferguson tractor. What has Zoe done? Zoe has done a 63.71. Richard Durrant, rounding pardon, and the TR4A 2.2-litre 4-cylinder Triumph engine. We've got a Caterham on the line. It's one we've seen before in the hands of Colin Davis, first runner in this class, but it's Sarah Davis in the car with its 1600cc Vauxhall engine. Richard Durrant with the Triumph, time of 64.32. So this is the sports car section of the New Barn Championship, and we've got another entry, a late entry in the saloons, which you'll see in a minute. Really interesting BMW. But meanwhile, Sarah Davis heads for the finish, first round the S's into semicircle, and off the line comes Anthony Ward in this BMW 2002 dating from 1992. He leads off the saloon car section of the Hennes Cider Classic Speed Championship in this 1992 BMW 2002, which was a revolutionary car, and the 2002 is a development of the BMW 1600, which really put BMW in a strong position financially. When they were making just the 507 and the Isetta bubble car, they were pretty much due to be going bust, and then they came with the 1800 saloon, which was a great success, and then the 1600, which was even more of a success. So it's nice to see Anthony Ward's 2002 heading for the finish to record a time of 54.53. Good time. Terry Clifford, long-time hill climber in all sorts of single-seaters, sports racing cars, but now in this lovely Alfa Romeo GT Junior 2-litre version. Could have this in 1300, 1600 or 2 litres. Terry's is very much like the sort of Alfa that raced in the European Touring Car Championship competition for the Lotus Cortinas. Anthony Ward's time in the BMW, 54.53. I think I've given you that. Terry Clifford on his way, but he hasn't finished in 26.83, so he's still completing his run. Here he is into and through S's, so we'll pick up his time in a second or two. Meanwhile, we've got Graham Hill on the line in a Mini Cooper S. This is a really interesting Cooper S with a 1298cc engine, but it's a short stroke engine which revs to 10,000 RPM. So Graham says it's not really suited to hill climbs. Graham being held on the start line. Just reboot the timing system. Okay, the timing gear needs a little bit of attention at the top of the hill, so there'll be a small delay. I think we've had some messages on social media. Missing Prescott and all our marshals, but it's better to stay safe for me. Well done, John. Yeah, it is better to stay safe. Although, as you can see from the pictures, we're taking enormous precautions against this dreadful COVID-19. Our start line marshals wearing face screens rather than face masks. Ian York, nice to see cars running at Prescott, isn't it? You're absolutely right. Wish I could be there to watch. Maybe the next event you could allow BOC members to spectate. Well, the club is working really hard with Tewkesbury Council to enable us to have spectators, and as soon as we possibly can, we will do so. I know it's disappointing for Bugatti Owners Club members not to be able to come to Prescott, which really is such a highlight of the motor racing season. Nice to be getting some messages. If you're watching outside the UK, please get in touch, give us your views of what you're seeing, and hopefully tempted when you next come to England on holiday to come and enjoy a hill climb meeting at Prescott. It's such a beautiful place. If you're watching from overseas, you might be wondering where in England Prescott is. Well, it's near the town of Cheltenham, sort of West Midlands, not too far from Stratford-on-Avon. And we got some views of the paddock with our handheld camera. Some people bring a bell tent to just in case it's wet and windy. Just a mention of our sponsors, which we need to acknowledge with many thanks. Classic and Sports Finance help us greatly. Longstone Tyres provide a lot of tyres for our competitors. Porsche Centre Tewkesbury usually supply our course cars, and Angstrom, who produce press tools primarily I think for Nissan but also for Rolls-Royce and people like that. And then if you want some cider, Henny's Cider, great supporters of Prescott. Unfortunately, I haven't seen any free samples lately, but I'm sure they get the hint. And a mention of our marshals in their orange suits. We always say a great thank you to our marshals who do a fantastic job, whether it's hot or cold, dry or wet. They're always here and do a brilliant job, particularly when things go wrong. And we do encourage people who would like to get close to motorsport to join in the marshals. They get fantastic training from the British Motor Racing Marshals Club, to the extent that they are often invited to marshal in other countries, Le Mans and places like that, and at Grand Prix meetings. And it's a great way of getting very close to the action. We've got 4 more days of competition events this year at Prescott, 5th and 6th of September and the 3rd and 4th of October, all again featuring these 2 championships, the New Barn and the Henny's Cider Championships. And I was promised to explain what a B license is. What does that mean? Well, when you start hill climbing, you get not a race license, but a speed license, which enables you to take part in hill climbs and sprints. And you start with a B license, which limits you to entering meetings that are available to B license holders, i.e. you probably won't get an entry into a championship meeting, but to enter and compete in half a dozen B license meetings, get signatures from the clerk of the course, and you can upgrade your license to an A license. Lots of people don't bother, they just enjoy competing in the B license meetings. But if you want to compete in championship meetings, you need an A license. When we paused, we were about to see Matt Clark in his Austin Mini. And he in fact is waiting short of the start line, but it looks as if we're back in action. And this Mini has a 1460cc engine, which is about as big a capacity you can get from an A-Series engine, A-Series BMC engine without the daylight coming in through the bores. So this will be a quick run from Matt Clark in his little Mini. It always astonishes people how small, how tiny the original Mini was. I mean, the current BMW Mini looks small enough, but it's a great big thing compared with the original Mini. And yet, you can get 4 people relatively comfortable in a Mini. It was a sensation when it first appeared in 1959, particularly with its tiny wheels. Dunlop made special tyres for it. I remember driving with my mum to Barcelona in about 1960 in her Mini, and people on the way down couldn't believe this little thing. So this is Graham Hill in his, rapidly around S's as Andy Clark takes off in his 1430cc version. Graham Hill, 51.97 is a very good time indeed. He was through the bridge speed trap at 61, quickest we've had today, I think. Here's Andy Clark taking a fairly early apex at Torres. Brake lights on, and then what Roy Lane would call the correct line around Pardon Hairpin, about a metre from the inside edge. Can he beat Graham Hill's time of 51.97? In the meantime, Matt Clark on his way in his Mini, the red one, again with the 1460cc engine. Time for Andy Clark, 55.59, and Matt Clark, obviously a family affair, well on his way round Pardon and along the top to the S's. He was quick at bridge, 64 miles an hour, so this should be a quick time in the hands of Matt Clark. Let's see, he's heading for the semicircle and then up to the finish. Will he beat the 51.97 of Graham Hill? Yeah, he does, 51.07, good run. Change from Minis, we've got a Scimitar GTE on the hill in the hands of John Louch. Classic hatchback sports car built by the Reliant company, which sadly no longer exists, but they built some excellent cars, and the Scimitar really was a pioneer with its fiberglass body and its hatchback. So John Louch well on his way, and he's followed by Mike Henney in the classic original Lotus Cortina, which was again a sensation when it was introduced. Cortina with its famous twin cam engine. And John Louch in the Scimitar, 52.53. Good time up Prescott. Let's see what Mike Henney can do. Heading for the finish. Can't really meet the time of the Minis. Here's Philip Stader in this lovely Alfa Romeo Berlina with its 1750 engine, classic, like a Turin sport, police car. Do you remember the Italian job? But Mike Henney in the Lotus Cortina, his time was a 56.17. Philip Stader, whereas there he is, just coming into the S's. Great cars, these Alfa Romeo, the Berlina 1750. Great in touring car racing in Europe. He's followed by this really original looking Ford Anglia of Dave Parr, who also competes in a Sierra Cosworth, very hot Sierra Cosworth. And this Anglia has got the 1700cc Ford pushrod engine. It's a very rapid car. Dave, we're looking at a quickest time at 51.07 in this class. Can Dave Parr match that? He's going to be followed by a couple of Mark I Escorts, and they're pretty quick as well. There's the first of our Escorts on the line in the hands of Martin Saunders. Dave Parr still running and completes his run in 56.96. So Martin Saunders in the Mark I Escort, 2-litre engine. Really brilliant rally car in the 60s and 70s. The Escort in both Mark I and Mark II versions. Rear-wheel drive, of course. Built by Ford as a really simple economy car, but very rapidly developed into a fearsome rally car. Time for Dave Parr, 56.96. We've said that. Second of our escorts off the line in the hands of Simon Braithwaite. This one's got the Cosworth RS 1600 engine, so that'll be quick. Martin Saunders, 57.44. What can Simon Braithwaite do? He's on his way up towards Pardon Hairpin. But can he beat a 51.07? Take some doing, but he's well on his way. Got 5 or 6 seconds to go. Heading for the finish. Yes, 50.6, brilliant. That takes the class, 50.60. Great run. We're now into the sports car version, although we've got one more Mini to come, number 69. In the meantime, we've got the Imp again. Stephen Akers in the Imp. Beg your pardon, it's Andrew Kearney in this Imp, number 68. And he's followed by Stephen Akers in another Mini, 1293cc Mini Cooper S. Andrew Kearney finishes in the Imp with a 54.67. Stephen Akers, he was quick, crikey, Andrew Kearney, 58 miles an hour in that little Imp. Stephen Akers, not quite so quick under the bridge, but heading nicely round Torres and up to Pardon Hairpin. We've got another Scimitar GT on the line, we'll see in a second or two. In the meantime, Stephen rounding Pardon and heading into the S's. And off the line goes Gary Cox in the second of our Reliance Scimitar GTEs. 3-litre Ford V6 engine, the famous Essex engine. Stephen Akers, 61.9 in the Mini. Much modified Scimitar GTE. Lowered suspension. Modifications to the Ford engine. Princess Anne had one of these. In fact, I think she had more than one of these. Kept getting stopped by the cops. So Gary Cox heading for the finishing line, and he's followed by Steve Louch, sharing this Scimitar with John. Gary Cox, 54.22. 54.22. Steve Louch is in the S's. We've got a Porsche 911, a classic Porsche 911 on the start line. Which brings us to the Hennies Cider Speed Championship class for sports cars pre-1977. As you can see, it's Richard Jones in this lovely orange 911. Kicks us off. Good time for Steve Louch in the Scimitar, 51.54. Here comes Richard Jones. Early 911 with a little small whale tail on the back. It's a 3-litre, looks like the classic RS 2.7. Porsches are always quick off the line because with the flat 6 engine behind the rear wheels, they get terrific traction, so minimum of wheel spin. First of our 2 MGBs, this is Brian Ashley in a much modified MGB GT, the hardtop version of the MGB, which you could have with the classic 4-cylinder engine, or later on with the Rover V8 in the front of it. MGB of Brian Ashley round the semicircle. A little bit of sweeping at Torres. It's loose pebbles on the outside, and people sometimes run into the what we call the kitty litter outside of Torres, and then they'll needs a bit of sweeping, because it's not fair on the following competitor to have to run over the marbles. On the line we've got another MGB, Charles Bolton, well-known car and driver. This time the drop-head version, but with a detachable hardtop, which actually is somewhat lighter than the MGB GT. But a time for Brian Ashley in the first of the MGBs was a 56.28. So Charles Bolton off the line in his MGB. You can see on the screen a time for 64 feet, first 64 feet, and if this is the first time you've watched competitive speed hill climbing in this country, you might well wonder what the significance of 64 feet is. Well, 2 seconds to 64 feet equates to 1 g of acceleration. 1 g, 1 force of gravity, is a very rapid takeoff from the start line. I think the quickest we've seen at any hill climb I've been to is about 1.67 off the line. Charles Bolton did it in 3.02 in his much modified MGB, and he's followed by the predecessor to the MGB, Ted Elwis, in his famous and immaculate MGA. The last MG sports car with a separate chassis. Charles Bolton records a 56.97, but the MGA was such an elegant shape. There was a twin cam version of the MGA, which in period was pretty unreliable and gave a lot of trouble, but nowadays if you can find a twin cam, they can be made to go really well and very reliably. But in the meantime, Ted Elwis, his has a slightly enlarged engine. It's a 2-litre engine out of an MGB, whereas the original MGA had a 1600cc engine. And Ted Elwis heads for the finish to record a time of 58.29, followed by Mike Fisher in another very similar MGB Roadster. So we're in pre-1977 sports cars in the Hennies Cider Classic Speed Championship, and this is for A license holders as well as B license. I don't know if you heard a whistle from a steam engine through your loudspeaker. We've got a steam railway passing very close to Prescott, so if you're into steam as well as cars, you can have a lovely day or weekend combining the two. Mike Fisher appears at the S's. Meanwhile, off the line comes Steve Fenner in another MGB, not nearly as much modified as Charles Bolton's. Mike Fisher 62, keep going, 64.9, so a much less modified car, whereas Steve Fenner's, you can see lowered suspension, probably a lot more power from the B series BMC engine. Is it left-hand drive? Probably brought back from the States. It's no handicap, of course, on the hills to be left-hand drive. If you're circuit racing, it might be a slight disadvantage on a clockwise circuit, but it doesn't really come into the equation very much. From MGBs to Porsche, Josh Sadler, who spent his life modifying and building Porsche 911s, now in retirement, but enjoying this 3-litre RS replica 911. Steve Fenner has finished with a good time of 53.66. Josh Sadler in this very rapid, minimalist, very lightweight Porsche. It's going to be quick. Now, can Josh get under 50 seconds? I think that's the question we can ask ourselves. Could well do. Nice line out of the S's, using every inch available on the road. Keep an eye on the time. No, 50.75, but a good time nevertheless. Little MG Midget on the line. MG Midget, same as a Sprite Mark II. We talked about the Frog Eye Sprite, which only kept its Frog Eye body in the Mark I version. Then the Mark II Sprite and the Mark I MG Midget had this slightly more conventional body shape. The one advantage, well, there are various advantages, but one main advantage was that the boot at the back, what the Americans call the trunk, did have a hinged lid, whereas the original Frog Eye didn't have an opening to its trunk boot at all. Certain aerodynamic advantage to run a drop head car with the hood up. Less wind resistance. We've got Josh Sadler, we got his time of 50.75. And it brings us to the next class, which is sports racing cars pre-77. And we can see this famous Malak U2 off the line in the hands of Peter Thurston. U2 led to Malak, and Malak's a famous name in clubman's racing and of course in endurance racing as well. Keith Wilson's time, 58.35, in the last of our runners in the roads going sports cars in the MG Midget, and his time 58.35. Now Peter Thurston well on his way already. He's 70 miles an hour through the bridge speed trap, which I think is the quickest we've had today so far. Major Malak started building, and indeed the U2 used to race in Formula 3, and the people in the streamlined, or in the classic Lotuses and Brabhams, looked at this rather square U2 and scoffed at it, but actually it was very quick and tended to beat them. Phil Fisher in the later Mark 11 Malak, and in clubman's racing they all had the pushrod 1700cc Ford engine. Peter Thurston, a very quickest time we've had today so far, a 46.73, really good time in the little U2. What can Phil Fisher do about that? I don't think he's going to match it. Elva Mark 7 in the hands of Martin Jones, who normally drives a single-seater Brabham. We've got a time for Phil Fisher, 48.79 in the Mark 11 Malak. Here's Martin Jones in this lovely Elva Mark 7S. Came back from the States. They were very popular in the States, competing against the Lotus 23s and in sports car racing. And indeed this one in 2016 won, I think it's the Madgwick Cup at the Goodwood Revival, and then got disqualified because it had bumped into another car halfway through the race. But the Elva Mark 7 is a lovely car. This one with a twin cam engine. Some of them had BMW engines. So he was the last. The Elva's the last of our sports racing cars. His time was 53.59. We're into single seaters with Mike Bainbridge in the Ensign LN3. Formula 3 Ensign. Ensign's built by Mo Nunn. If you're in the States, you might recognize the name Mo Nunn, because he later on got very involved in Indianapolis racing. And of course reminds us that the Indy 500 is taking place this weekend. Much delayed, of course, because of Corona. So it's Mike Bainbridge, 71 under the bridge. This will be a quick-ish run, 48.18. He's followed by Les Buck. Now Les won this championship last year in the Pringet Mistral, Formula Ford car, built by two gentlemen, Mr. Pringle and Mr. Corbett, so it was the Pringet, and they built 17 of these. And Les thinks there are 2 or 3 left. At one time he thought his was unique, but he found there was one in Germany and another one being rebuilt in this country. Pringet Mistral. Mike Bainbridge, 48.18 in the end side. On the line, such a pretty car. It's Phil Chatterton in this beautiful Brabham BT18 that was raced in period by Chris Williams, who went on to a race in Formula 1, but this car competed in both Formula 2 and Formula 3 in the hands of Chris Williams. And Phil Chatterton, his cars are always immaculately prepared. Les Buck in the Pringet, 50.83. It's an interesting story on the line that I'll tell you about in just a second, but in the meantime Phil navigates the S's. Here's Carol Nichols in the Nike. Now the Nike was built by her dad. Ken Nichols built hundreds of race car chassis, both for Formula Ford, for Formula Junior, for sports car racing. He built a lot of Lotus 23 chassis. Sadly, he died in 2014, but Carol always was determined to find and race a Nike, and here she is. Phil Chatterton's finished with a 56 point. Carol, who now lives, Ken was based down in Devon, but Carol is now based in Wales, and she's been hill climbing this Nike for 3 or 4 years. Andy Tippett follows her in a really interesting car. This is the Brabham BT30S, 30X, I beg its pardon, with a Buick engine. Originally would have had a 2.5 litre Coventry Climax engine, and this was originally developed by Mike McDougall, and Mike used to race with Jack Brabham. He wanted to go racing by himself. He asked Jack if there was a car around, and Jack said, well, you can have that old development chassis that's sitting in the corner there. And one of the interesting things about this chassis, this Brabham chassis, is that, I don't know if you remember the Spanish Grand Prix when wings first appeared, and they were fragile things on the end of long sticks front and back, and after 2 races they were banned. But this Brabham has still got the holes on the front uprights that the pillars for the front wings used to go into. Time for Andy Tippett in the Brabham, 47.42. Here's Jez Kurzweil. Brings us into the Bugatti Owners Club Members Championship. The saloons, we've got 3 of them. Well, we've got 2 of them with 3 drivers. And this is Jez Kurzweil in the Rover Mini. We've got 2 drivers sharing a Renault Twingo that you will see very shortly. But Jez, little Rover Mini, classic Rover Mini, 1275. Here's the Renault Twingo, the last of the front-engine Twingos before the latest version, of course, was a modified smart car with the engine in the back. Time for Jez Kurzweil, 63.26 in the Mini. Here comes the Twingo. Cute little car with Alpine on the side of it and in the correct Alpine colours of blue with the gold stripe. Just those 2 cars in the saloon versions, and it brings us to the Bugatti Owners Club Members Championship for sports cars, and Michael Thompson kicks us off in the Honda S2000 with the engine that revs to some astronomical 8,500 revs or so. Makes it a very quick car. Tom Mogurossi in the Twingo, 59.22 for 52. Michael Thompson in the Honda was under the bridge at 56 miles an hour. He's followed by Austin Weltman in the Lotus Elise, which has been such a success, really saved Lotus's finances, and rumour has it that a new Elise is shortly to be released. But in the meantime, cute little car, so light, with the Rover K Series engine on the back, although the latest ones have a Toyota engine. Michael Thompson's time, 51.29. That was quick in the Honda S2000. Elise with the hood up. Not easy to get in and out of if you've got the hood up, like posting yourself through a letterbox. But Austin Weltman heads for the finish in the Elise and makes way for Oliver Chilton in another Mazda MX-5. Here it is. Detachable hard top. Good for aerodynamics, does add a bit of weight. Austin Weltman's time 55.43 in the Elise, 55.43. Children into and through the S's brings us to the MGB of John Cavendish, looking for all the world like the works MGBs that raced at Sebring with their flared arches to the wheels and the headlights behind perspex, reminding us that the works MGBs raced both at Le Mans and at Sebring in the States. This is John Cavendish, quite quick under the bridge, 53 miles an hour, and we'll watch him through S's. Really interesting car on the line, which is a big contrast to some of the previous runners. There it is, the 1929 MG M-Type, which Frank Ashley has had since 1967. M-Type, the first MG midget with its fabric body and pointed tail. John Cavendish has finished with a time of 58.18. Frank has slightly modified the M-Type, given it hydraulic brakes. Originally they had cable brakes. As I know to my cost, my first car was one of these. I got done for speeding at 42 miles an hour, and I said to the cop how pleased I was that the thing would actually reach 42 miles an hour. He was not amused. Bought mine for 40 quid, sold it for 45, which I thought was a good deal, but M-Types are now worth considerably more than that, and it's great to see Frank back again. A regular competitor. I think the only Morgan here today, Morgan 4.4, the 2-litre Morgan in the hands of Peter Hawkey. Morgan under new ownership. Belonged to the Morgan family, of course, since they started in the early 1900s, but has now been bought by an Italian investment group, under which things are moving very fast ahead in Morgan. Lots of new models, using the very advanced aluminium frame, getting away from the really original steel chassis that these early, well, Morgans from time immemorial up to today, really, the 4-cylinder ones had the separate chassis. This one in the hands of Peter Hawkey has finished with a 56.67. Back to Porsches, with Simon Tarling in this lovely 996 GT3. GT3, just about the quickest road-going 911 on the market. So this is the class for all-comers sports cars, and you can't be much more all-coming than a GT3 Porsche. 3.6 litre flat 6. Now then, TR7 V8 of Maxwell Briley Jones. Time for the Porsche 50.95. But this is, it's not a 4-cylinder TR7 modified with the V8. This was originally built as a TR7 V8, and these were rallied very successful by the Works BMC cars. Tony Pond in particular was a great star in TR7 V8s, and this one is in the Works colours. In the States these were called TR8s, but they never were called that in this country. He's followed by Jerry Neary in the Westfield with a 2-litre Vauxhall engine. Jerry, long-time competitor here, both in Caterham and Westfield. Nice to see Jerry out again. This car had a bit of a thump at another hill climb last year, so it's needed a lot of rebuilding, and it's been nicely done. Jerry into the S's. 2-litre Vauxhall engine, producing something like 260 horsepower, which is in a lightweight chassis, it gives you plenty of go. He's followed by John Bradshaw in another Westfield. John Bradshaw, this one also has a 2.1 litre Vauxhall engine. Time for Jerry Neary, 52.83. Now I suspect that John Bradshaw could well be under the 52nd mark. It's a very rapid car. 40 seconds and he's well round semicircle. Let's keep an eye on the clock. 44.84, excellent time for John Bradshaw. George Nurick, another long-time competitor in a Westfield, this time with a 1700 cross-flow engine, similar to the engine we talked about in the Mallock Clubman's cars. And both George Nurick and Jerry Neary have been competing in the same class for donkey's years. Time for John Bradshaw, we've given you 44.84. Great time, quickest so far today. So George Nurick nearing the finish. Last runner in this class. We go back a class to the other Twingo in the hands of Richard Plug. We saw Tom Mogurossi in this car a few minutes ago. And George Nurick records a 52.36. So winner so far, leading that class, will be John Bradshaw with a 44.84. Although we've still got a second run in the MGB GTS in the hands of David Slade. We saw it in the hands of John Cavendish just now. So here comes the Twingo with a 1600cc engine, Alpine livery, Alpine I should say livery, metallic blue and orange. And things are hotting up because we're coming towards the racing cars in the Bugatti Owners Club All-Comers class. But in the meantime, one more look at this Sebring MGB GT. David Slade, Richard Plug in the Twingo, 57.22. David Slade heading towards the finish. It'll be in the 50s. But Clive Austin, 2.13 for the first 64 seconds in the Empire Wraith, which we'll talk about. David Slade's time still clicking up, but here's Clive Austin in this Empire Wraith with its very advanced aerodynamics developed by Willem Toet, who used to be aerodynamicist for Ferrari. We've got a time of day for David Slater, 58.08, but in the meantime, let's concentrate on this fantastic Empire Wraith. It's got a 1600cc, I beg its pardon, it's got a 1 litre bike engine. And Clive's done a 43.52. Well, that's a pretty good time. 43.52, but Clive, I think, will be hoping to get nearer the 40-second mark. On the line next will be Andrew Greenan in another Empire, but this is the Empire Evo 2. And it's raced by Andrew and his brother Adam. And Andy is the record holder at the Crystal Palace Sprint on the old Crystal Palace racing cars. Now 85 under the bridge, by far the quickest we've seen so far. Andy Greenan in the Empire Evo with a Suzuki GSRX engine, still only 1 litres, but massive power to weight ratio. So we saw a 43.52 for Clive. What can Andy do? I think it'll be, yes, it's a 40.26. He'll be kicking himself for not getting under 40 seconds. Meantime, Robin Johnson takes off in the Tigger SF83. Tigger company, Tim Schenken and Howden Ganley produced lots of racing and world endurance cars. This one was produced for the Formula Super Ford, so it's got a 1600 Ford engine, but we've got a treat on the line which we'll see very shortly, reminding us that this is the home of the Bugatti Owners Club. Here's Ed Burgess in this lovely Grand Prix Bugatti, the Type 51, with its twin cam, straight 8, 2.3 litre Bugatti engine. Development of the Type 35, the classic Type 35. Quickly pick up Robin Johnson's time, 50.2 in the Tigger. But look at this lovely straight 8 roller bearing engine, classic Type 51 supercharged Bugatti. They are very quick cars. I mean, the Type 35B is quick enough. The Type 51 has another 20 or 30 horsepower. But there was a sprint race set up by one of the magazines between a Porsche 911 Turbo and a Bugatti Type 35, and they were pretty much neck and neck up to about 90 miles an hour. Another one, Colin Bullock in another Type 51. Unlike Ed's, this one is road equipped, so if you had a Bugatti in the 30s, you could race it in Grand Prix. You could then slap mudguards and lights on it and go touring, or indeed enter it in sports car racing. Ed Burgess in the first of the Type 51s, 54.66. Let's see what Colin Bullock can do. His car is considerably quieter than Ed's. I don't think Ed's has silencers, but this one, because Colin Bullock drives it on the road, has a much quieter engine. He's driven this car in New Zealand. He's taken it on lots of long-distance rallies, and he says, you know, it makes a pretty uncomfortable but good fun touring car. So Colin Bullock, 62.07, is a bit slower than, or a bit less quick than Ed Burgess in the first of our Type 51s. Back to another 60 years or so, and we got Pete Tatham in the supercharged 1300cc OMS. OMS built up in Yorkshire by Steve Owen. He's built hundreds of these cars for sprinting hill climbing. This one with a Hayabusa with a Rotax supercharger makes it a very rapid car, and although it's 1300cc, because it's blown, it goes normally in the 2-litre racing car class, but of course today things are slightly different. It's racing cars of all shapes and sizes in the all-comers class of the Bugatti Auto Club Championship. So Pete Tatham, 86 under the bridge. I didn't see what Andy Greenham was doing under the bridge. Probably slightly more than that. And Pete Tatham records a 42.22. Here's Murray Wakeham in another OMS, but this one is unusual. Well, it was unusual because it was the first OMS with a carbon fibre tub chassis. Again, it's a GSXR Suzuki engine, unblown, so it's a 1 litre. But Murray Wakeham, 69 through the bridge, and for many people the highlight of the meeting is lining up on the start line. It's our record holder here at Prescott. Let's just see Murray Wakeham through the S's, and then we'll focus on this amazing car that's on the start line. Murray's time will be coming up any time now. Look on the start line. This is Sean Gould, record holder here. Time for Murray Wakeham, 45.48. Sean in this Gould GR59, but with a 4 litre Judd engine, sort of engine that was used in LMP2 at Le Mans. First 64 feet, 2.11, under the bridge at, only 88, which is surprising, because when he broke the record here back in September, I think it was 110 under the bridge. So Sean taking it relatively easy. He's got nothing to prove really today. It's not a championship hill climb, but isn't it wonderful? Just imagine the power to weight ratio of this car. It weighs about 400 kilos. Its engine produces about 700 horsepower. So off the line and up to about 100 miles an hour, it's as quick, if not quicker, than a Formula One car. Sean finishes with a 37.89. The record that he recorded back in September, 35.41. 35.41, but today 37.89. Just having some fun and trying out various tweaks on the car. Back to the TR7 V8, this time in the hands of Pete Fletcher. Which I think will be our final runner of the first runs today. But I think you can guess who is fastest so far. It's Sean, of course, with the 37.89. Pete Fletcher sharing this TR7 V8 with its Rover engine. 4.6 litre. The V8 Rover developed from the Buick engine, Oldsmobile and Buick, which originally was a 3.5 litre, but I think people have bored them out to about 5.1 litres altogether. This one 4.6. I was wrong about him being the last runner because, of course, we've got Adam Greenham in the Empire that we saw his brother Andrew in just now. This is the one with the 1 litre Suzuki engine, Empire Evo 2. Nicely off the line in 2.19 and 86 under the bridge. Excellent line through Ettores, a late entry, late apex at Ettores. Classic line round Pardon. What's Adam up against? I've lost Andrew's time. It's usually a needle match between the two of them. Yeah, in the 30s, 39.93, excellent run by Adam Greenham. And here's the Tigger again. People call them Tigers, but they shouldn't. It's Tim Schenken. So it's a Tigger SF83, Joe McCrell, sharing with Robin Johnson. And 62 under the bridge. Good line around Victoria's late apex. Couple of gears and then heavy braking for Pardon. close in at Pardon. So Joe McCrell completes this run. Will it be under 50 seconds? Not quite. 51.54. End of our first runs, so we go right back to the beginning again, and I can see the little Fiat Abarth lining up, ready to come out. The 2019 season at Prescott Hill Climb marked the 90th anniversary of the Bugatti Owners Club. Included a host of celebrations and classic car displays throughout the year to mark this special milestone in the club's history. The club was founded in 1929, held lots of hill climb events in the 30s on a variety of dusty surfaces across the south of England, but of course encountered growing opposition by local residents and needed to find a more permanent and suitable venue. In 1937, the estate here at Prescott came on the market, and actually it was the Vintage Sports Car Club who found it. They couldn't afford it and passed it on to the Bugatti Owners Club, who bought it and held the first event in the following spring in 1938 using the original short course, which is still used by the Vintage Sports Car Club today. Before the competition events had even begun at Prescott, a unique and special car returned for the first time in 80 years to kick-start the 90th celebrations. It was the Works Bugatti 5950B Grand Prix car, built by the factory and brought here to take part in the very first international meeting at Prescott in the summer of 1939, with Jean-Pierre Vimille at the wheel. The car was the most powerful Bugatti of its generation. Its 8-cylinder supercharged 4.7-litre engine and twin rear wheels, specially fitted for the event, made it fairly unsuited to the narrow, twisty nature of the course at Prescott. They even claimed that it was too big to use the return road. Despite this, Vimille drove superbly, only narrowly missing out on victory. He was beaten by the ERA of Raymond Mays. Jean Bugatti apologised and vowed to return the following year with a more suitable car, but with the outbreak of World War II, this wasn't to be. This car would have one further outing after World War II, taking victory with Vimille in Paris in the 1945 Coupe des Prisonnières. It remains in original unrestored condition and would spend the summer months in 2019 on show at the Bugatti Trust. The opening event of the season saw Prescott hosting 2 rounds of the British Hill Climb Championship. Unusually, these weren't the opening rounds for the series for 2019, Lowton Park having staged these just a week earlier. Trevor Wellis, who won the championship in 2018, was immediately on the pace of qualifying, but the former Hill record holders weekend would end abruptly on the first runoff after clouting the barriers at the exit of Pardon. The big story of the event, and indeed throughout the 2019 British Championship, was the increased threat to the dominance of the big V8 engine single-seaters by the little tiny, mostly motorcycle-engined cars getting faster and faster and challenging for overall honours. Former champion Scott Moran took victory in the opening runoff, winning round 3, but increasingly threatened by the little bike-engine GWR Raptor of Richard Spedding, showing the degree to which the older Goulds came under threat.
Very technical hill for us. It is particularly hard work in the Gould. It does, takes up a lot more track than some of the smaller stuff. It's just difficult to get it going because they really sort of need the aero to work properly. The short straights don't really give you the opportunity to get the speed up, but it still works, but you can't really stretch the legs properly. So we are really under threat from the smaller cars. So it's and it's a testament to the engineering and the smaller stuff. It's really it's brilliant.
How do you have to modulate your style for somewhere like Prescott?
Well, my opinion would be that Prescott's all about patience. You've got long corners, long slow corners and some long fast corners. And if you try and fuss the car, if you pick up the throttle too early, then you lose time, you wash out, you're upsetting the car, you're upsetting the balance. Shelsley is a lot more of a bravery hill. You have to be patient to an extent, but the bravery and the power and the downforce makes a big difference. Whereas I think here, you can see with Rob in the 1100, right up behind me, thanks, and the driver really, the discipline, the car, the dampers, it works the car mechanically really hard. So it's nowhere to hide if your car understands.
Right, we're off again. Second runs. Kicked off with the New Barn Interclub license. Championship saloons have had my knuckles wrapped for calling it a B license. It's now called an Interclub license. This is Lee Carter in this lovely little Fiat Abarth with its twin-cylinder water-cooled engine, bored out from 500 to 695, and racing as traditional with the engine cover open. Whether it gives you a little bit of aerodynamic downforce, I don't know. Probably not, but you've got to have it open. It's part of the deal. Lee Carter sharing this car with Dave Fripp. I think it's their first season, certainly their first season with this car. And as you can see on the screen, lovely sunshine, so a bone-dry track. And Lee Carter heading towards the finish, 67.32. Here's the Ford Puma of Adrian Burrows. There was a special version of the Puma, wasn't there, with in metallic blue with flared wheel arches, which was built in much smaller numbers. They called it the Racing Puma, I think. But this is a standard one, slightly modified. Makes an excellent hill climb. Well, makes an excellent road car that you can then, at the weekends, have fun on the hills with. Off the line comes Will Goff in the Ford Sierra Cosworth. 2 litres, 2 doors, of course, and the big whale tail at the back. Heading round Orchard, 54 miles an hour. Adrian Burrows in the Puma records a time of 60.31. Will Goff well on his way, heading towards Pardon on the line. Very rapid little Hillman Imp, we'll see in a second or two. There it is, number 24, Mark Maynard in the rear engine, of course, Hillman Imp. Had swing axle front suspension. Hillman were desperate that it shouldn't oversteer, so they made it understeer with this swing axle front suspension. The way to make an Imp handle was to carry a bag of concrete in the boot at the front, trunk at the front. 58.22. For Will Goff in the Ford Cosworth. Ooh, nearly into the kitty litter goes Mark Maynard in the Imp, but no harm done. Engine at the back, very lightweight little engine, developed or based on a Coventry Climax design, so rather similar to the Climax engines used in Lotuses, Lolas and just about everything else. Maggie Richards having her first Prescott competition day in the Renault Clio 182. Her husband is an experienced hill climber. He's persuaded, well maybe she persuaded him to let her have a go at hill climbing, and I'm sure she's enjoying this Renault Clio. Perfect car to start hill climbing. We've got a time for Mark Maynard of 55.61 in the Imp. Maggie nicely round at Torres. There is a driving school here at Prescott if you want to have an introduction to hill climbing or to hone your hill climbing skills. All through the year there are 4 or 5 days of the Prescott Driver School, where you get excellent tutorials from very experienced hill climbers, and it's all videoed, of course, so you can see how you are getting on. And people have reported very favourably on the driving school as a way of improving their times. We've got marshals looking rather worriedly. I hope that doesn't mean a trail of oil in the S's. But James Dockery in the Subaru is held on the line. Have we got a time for Maggie Richards? We have. It's 62.88. Looks as if we have got a trail of oil, so there will be a little time for spreading some talcum powder to dry it up. More messages. Hi Chris, greetings from Padstow. Is there any progress on the Sandra Max duel? Well, that's an interesting story. If you were watching the Grand Prix from Silverstone, you'll know that Max Verstappen was asked by his team to slow down, and he replied, "I'm not going to slow down. Don't want to. I'll be accused of driving like a granny," which I thought was a bit unfair on grannies. And the previous lady record holder here at Prescott is a granny, Sandra Tomlin. She drives a Pilbeam with a 4-litre Judd engine, so it's a fearsome thing, and she's very quick. And so we persuaded Sandra to issue a challenge to Max to have a competition somewhere. And if you watch Johnny Herbert interviewing Max Verstappen before the Spanish Grand Prix at Barcelona last weekend, you'll have seen a little clip of Sandra issuing the challenge to Max. He replied, well, she can have a go against my father first. But I think Red Bull and Sky F1 are very keen for Max to take up this challenge. So the answer to your clip is no further news. But of course, Shelsley is very keen for it to happen, as are Red Bull, as are Sky F1. So keep your fingers crossed that this competition will take place. It'll be, I think, probably best of 3 runs up a certain hill climb. Ian Wilson watching live from deepest France. Fantastic to see you all enjoying life. We are. Be safe, have fun. Thanks, Ian. I hope you're safe and having fun down in deepest France and don't have to quarantine when you come back. If you come back, maybe you're based there. Alan Rhodes, missing being on the hill, aren't we all? Well, we're not. With my cameras. Be back soon, you will. Thanks, Alan. Mim Toolbox, Peter Kakanis. Well, we know that name. Good to see Prescott live streaming. Missing competition in the Escort this year. Keep up the good work. Peter, thanks a lot from Krikowel. Julian Jones, absolutely loving this. Really miss being there. Lots of people do, but this is great. I can almost feel the sun on my face and the wind in my hair. Well, yes, and an occasional burst of rain as well, just to add to the fun. So, a bit of a pause. Chris Bone, greetings from Norfolk. Great to have the live feed. Yeah, isn't it good? It's not as good as being here on the spot, but we're doing our best to bring you all the action. Part of which is laying a trail of, we used to be cement dust, but it's a bit more high-tech now. So someone, and I don't think it's Maggie Richards in the Clio, has laid a trail of oil all round the S's. Mark Maynard in the Imp might need to look underneath and see if there's a leak from the little engine in the back of the Imp. I'm not accusing him, but it's possible he was the runner before Maggie in the Clio. So we'll shortly be back in action. The first few cars that run over that trail of powder will probably throw up a bit of a dust cloud, but that's okay. On the line, we've got the Subaru STI of James Dockery, classic Subaru Impreza. And the Impreza, of course, really comes to the fore on a wet road because the great advantage of four-wheel drive. We often see the hot Imprezas, which can produce about more than 500 horsepower, off the line with minimum wheel spin in around 2 seconds, which is massive acceleration. So we'll see how James Dockery gets on. There he is on the line, ready to go. Red flags are in, so we're back in action. That's good news. So the B license is now called an inter-club license. The A license is now called a national license. But I shall find it quite difficult to remember not to talk about B licenses and A licenses. Subaru with its flat 4 engine, giving it very low center of gravity. And the great thing about Imprezas, if you can find a good one, they're not expensive. But lots of them have had a pretty hard life. So if you do look for an early Impreza, you need to proceed with care. We really didn't think earlier in the week that we were going to have a clear blue sky. Isn't that a treat? And as you will have seen if you were watching that little clip of our 90th year celebration video, Prescott was discovered by the Vintage Sports Car Club in 1937 when the estate came on the market. They decided they couldn't afford it, but passed it on to the Bugatti Owners Club, who at the time had enough money in the bank, and the Bugatti Owners Club bought it in 1937, and by the following year the track was cleared, it was tarmacked, and the first meeting took place in 1938. The Impreza had a very hesitant start, and indeed has stopped, as you can see, 100 yards beyond the start line. I have a feeling that James set off with too few revs and then perhaps flooded it, but now firing on all 4 cylinders, and you can't make up the time you've lost, but at least you can continue up the hill and enjoy the rest of the climb. We've got the little Fiat back on the line. When I say Fiat, I mean the Abarth. In the meantime, James Dockery rounds the S's. There goes Dave Fripp, having his first season sharing with Lee Carter in this cute little Fiat Abarth that they acquired relatively recently, tweaked a bit. Very rare car. Golly, I should think there are more than a dozen or so of the Abarths in this country. We had a parade of Fiat 500 at Goodwood a few years ago, and hundreds of them turned up. Virtually the whole of the circuit was full of Fiat 500s. So those were the competitors in the saloon version, saloon class of the New Barn Interclub License Championship. Now we move on to the sports cars, kicked off by Colin Davis in the Caterham Road Sport with its 1600cc Vauxhall Sigma engine. It's quite an unusual engine. A lot of people run the Vauxhall 2-litre engine, as we've seen, but not many run the little Sigma of Colin. On the line, the Ginetta, the G20. Ginetta's been in business for a long time, and the G20, one of the most popular models, but in recent years, Ginetta under new ownership have really thrived with 3 classes of for racing, including the junior class for 14-year-olds, and that's a sort of nursery for future Grand Prix drivers as an alternative to coming up the karting route. Here's the G20 in the hands of John Brunner with a Ford Zetec engine, and we've got a time for Colin Davis in the Caterham of 57.58. John Brunner might be under the 52nd mark. Meanwhile, this dear little Austin Healey Sprite of Peter Neal is under the bridge. 54.48 for John Brunner. It's a quick Sprite, this, with its 1275 engine in the hands of Peter Neal. Looking so smart with its rather attractive rollover bar and wire wheels. There's a great market in this country for number plates, and that number plate is probably worth almost as much as the car. We've got a Caterham on the line in the hands of Andrew Wilcox. There it goes. Peter Neal. Again, can he get under the 52nd mark in the Sprite? No, he can't. Heading for the finish. Can he get under the 60? Yeah, he can. 58.5. Rounding at Torres is Andrew Wilcox in the 1600cc Super 7 Caterham development. Caterham, of course, took over the manufacture of the Lotus 7 from Colin Chapman of Lotus, and have made a huge success, hardly changing the car, in appearance anyway, over 30 or 40 years. Now here's last year's winner of this class, of this championship, David Rose, in the Lotus Elan fixed headlights. Very pretty little Elan with knock-on wheels, which is unusual. Most of the Elans had bolt-on wheels. Number plate dating from 1963. And with the famous 1600 twin-cam engine with its Cortina block, which first appeared in, of course, the Cortina Lotus Cortina. Now a gang of Mazda MX-5s. Rob Guttridge leads the way. In a Mark 1, I think it's Mark 1, maybe a Mark 1.5. And we've got a time for David Rose in the Elan, 54.64. Rob Guttridge will be followed by Steve Perry in another early MX-5. Soft top, there he goes off the line. And Rob Guttridge through the S's and towards the finish. Steve Perry fairly gently round Orchard, but Rob Guttridge has finished with a 62.26. Here's Steve Perry On the line, Paul Ferro in the metallic blue one. If the sun is shining, you might as well have the hood down, is his belief. And he takes off with a time of 2.98, under 3 seconds for the first 64 feet, which is good going. Steve Perry heading towards the finish. Which he does in 63.71. 63.71, Steve Perry, Paul Ferro into Pardon, heavy braking, nice line through Pardon, up through a couple of gears, along maybe the second fastest element of Prescott, along the top towards the S's, followed by MX5 number 3 or 4, is it, in the hands of John Wadsworth. John, it is indeed, it's the fourth of the MX5s, a much more modern one, only 15 years old. Paul Ferro, under 60 seconds, yes indeed, 58.98 for Paul Ferro in the metallic blue one. On the line, the MGTF of John White, we'll see in a second or two, has the advantage of the mid-engine. MGTF, excellent handling. Nice cars, the MGF and the MGTF. Bargain if you can find a good one. And John Wadsworth in the Mazda, under 60 seconds, possibly. Yes, 58.95. Here's John White. Interview round Orchard. We'll try and persuade Sean Gould to top the 100 miles an hour under the bridge this next time, but he's certainly not going to go crazy. It isn't a championship meeting. Excuse me while I have a quick swig of jungle juice. Now here's the MGZR. Meanwhile, John White in the MGTF has finished with a 63.04. Jamie Stevens in the MGZR, again with the K-Series engine. Good to see MG are back in the market, but of course they're selling the cars they make in China. But it's good to see they've had a terrific increase in their share of the market, so they're doing well with the MG SUV. Little MG3 is a good little car as well. Now then, Porsche 924 Turbo of Steve Cooper. Tell the turbo by the air inlets at the front of the bonnet. They're really quite rare nowadays. There are very few 924s left. Slight squirm out of Pardon for Steve, but he's going fine. But they are getting more popular, and the value of both 924s and 944s has certainly hardened a lot in the last couple of years. Talking 944s, Paul Renison off the line in his 944 with the 3-litre 4-cylinder Porsche engine. Steve Cooper 54.97 in the 924 Turbo. Paul Renison in the 944. Can he match that? That's a good time, 54.97. Heading towards the S's. On the line, we come more up to date with the Cayman, but in the meantime, Paul Renison in the 944 successfully avoiding the white powder on the line. Here's the Cayman of Alan McFarlane, 56, a little bit quicker around orchard that Paul Renison was, but Paul finishes with a 56.54. Cayman, I don't have in front of me his time on the first run, but I have a feeling it wasn't as quick as that. We'll see how Alan gets on this time. Meantime, Andrew Meredith is on the line with the normally aspirated 924. Alan McFarlane, the Cayman, rounding semicircle, heads for the finish, 54.24. 54.24. Quite a good time. This 924, lots of stickers, might be modified, but certainly an ideal competition car if you haven't got a trailer. The 924 disappears. What reappears, what appears, is this lovely Sunbeam Alpine of Simon Firth Bernard, off the line nicely. 3.03, 64 feet. Alpine never had pretensions to competition in period. It was quite rightly regarded as a touring car. But sold in its thousands, both in the UK and overseas. And this one is really nice to see an Alpine in beautiful condition, because of course, like most cars of that era, they were very prone to rust, and most Alpines just were eaten by the tin worm and disappeared. But it's good. And of course the Alpine formed the basis of the Sunbeam Tiger. Carroll Shelby saw an Alpine and thought, well, with a V8 engine this would make a really rinky-dink little sports car, and it did, and was hugely successful in the States. Zoe Sherman in the MR2, little mid-engine. Don't know if it was inspired by the MGTF, but it's along similar lines. Has absolutely no luggage room. You can't really take an MR2, two of you, away for the weekend unless your partner is prepared to have the luggage on his or her lap. We've got a time for Simon Firth Bernard in the Alpine, which was a 61.35. I think that's considerably quicker than his first run today. Zoe Sherman heading towards the finish, and then Richard Durrant in the TR4A. Separate chassis, of course, the TR4, developed from the original TR2, which appeared at the Earls Court Motor Show in 1952. And then the original TR2 was not regarded as terribly attractive, so Triumph got the Italian Mr. Michelotti to redesign the body, and so the TR4 appeared with this more modern body shape, but on the same chassis. Zoe's time was a 62.08. We've got a little bit of oil on the start line, so that's being powdered. Where is Richard? Richard is nearly finishing. We've got Sarah Davies. Now Sarah having her first go in the Caterham with husband Colin, who kicked off this class. They've both been competing together for some time. Usually well, Sarah says he usually insists on winning, so she gets to do the washing up, but I think they're pretty closely matched. She's the last runner, I think, in this class. The sports car class brings us to the Hennes Cider Classic Speed Championship, which is for both interclub and national license holders, kicked off by Anthony Ward in the BMW 2002. Sarah did a 59.22 in the Caterham. Anthony Ward in the BMW 2002, much modified. There was then a 2002 TII, wasn't there? That was considerably modified, and then the ultimate 2002 was the turbo, with really the first mass-produced, or relatively mass-produced, turbo saloon, and suffered from quite considerable turbo lag. The turbo came in with a bang, but when it came within a bang, it was pretty exciting. Anthony Ward finishes with a 52.85. Here's Terry Clifford. I used to compete against Terry when we both had single-seaters. He then went on to an MP43 Pilbeam two-seater for a while, but in the last few years he has seen the light and decided to go for this lovely Alfa Romeo 1750 GT Junior, but actually 2-litre engine. Alfa really do have the knack of making elegant cars. The current ones, the Giulia, Stelvio, the Giulietta, all have that Italian touch of elegance. Now a Mini. It's a Mini in the hands of Graham Hill, and it's a very quick one. FOP 4D, good number plate. Tiny little Mini. Terry Clifford in the Alfa 55.78. So Graham Hill, can he get under 50 seconds? I suspect he probably can, having said which he can't. It's a 51.94. He's followed by Andy Clark. Andy's got a 1430cc engine, A-Series BMC engine, makes of a very sprightly, no, sprightly doesn't really apply, but it's a very rapid little Mini road car. When the Mini Cooper first came out, or when the Mini was first raced, Mini Cooper was first raced in this country, in whenever the Mini Cooper first came out, 63 was it? It kept the wheels kept breaking, and very quickly BMC had to produce a much stronger wheel for the Cooper, and particularly the Cooper S. Number 60 is Matt Clark in his Mini, and we've got a time for Andy Clark of 56.13, and for Graham Hill 51.94. That's the first of our Minis, and boy, that's quick. So Matt is heading towards the S's. It brings us to these two Reliant Scimitar GTEs with their V6 Ford Essex engine, fiberglass body. And there aren't many left, but what there are mostly now in immaculate restored condition. Makes a very good, nice road car, and modified like these are, an excellent hill climbing car. This is John Louch in his GTE. Mike Henney on the line with his much modified Lotus Cortina. We'll see in a second or two. John, fairly wide line out of the S's. Here's Mike Henney's Lotus Cortina. Slightly smoky engine, nice loose clearances. And John finishes with the GTE with a 51.39. The funny thing is, if you look at the 0 to 60 and maximum speed times of the original Lotus Cortina, the unmodified original Lotus Cortina, the 0 to 60 and the maximum speed are almost the same as the modern two-cylinder Fiat 500 Cinquecento. Shows how things have progressed in 60 years or so since the Lotus Cortina appeared. Another Alfa Romeo, this is Philip Stader in the Berliner 1750. Be fun if he painted it like a Turin police car, but actually it's more entertaining with its checkered flag on the roof. We've got a time for John Louch in the GTE of 51.39. Good time. Mike Henney, number 62, in the Lotus Cortina, 55.18. Philip Stader on the hill in the green Alfa Romeo. Philip and his wife compete in this, but they've also got an A35, much modified, little Austin A35, with which they have enormous fun every now and then on the hills. Ford Anglia in the hands of Dave Parr, long-time hill climber. He's had the Anglia for a long time, had the Sierra Cosworth for even longer, since I think he bought it new. But in the meantime, Philip Stader, we've got 54.15 in the green Alpha. Dave Parr pressing on in this Anglia. When the Anglia first appeared, it was regarded as revolutionary with that reverse slope rear window, but it was the first car to have the Ford 997cc engine, brilliant engine that Keith Duckworth then developed and really was the start of Cosworth. And I had a Lotus 18, a Formula Junior Lotus 18 with the original 997cc Cosworth engine. Time for Dave Parr in his Anglia, 57.53. Now these two escorts, Martin Saunders first of all, in the 2-litre Mark 1. And he was shortly to be followed by Simon Braithwaite with his escort with the RS 1600 engine, who has just left the start line, considerably quicker than Martin, 67 through Orchard as opposed to 53. So he's got much more power despite... Well, it's a 2-litre version of the RS 1600. So as you can see, plenty of power, and with those wide wheel arches, plenty of road holding as well. So he will probably be considerably quicker than the 56.34 of Martin Saunders. See the imp again, this time in the hands of Andrew Kearney. And Simon Braithwaite, 50.43, yeah, a lot, but by far the quicker of the two escorts. Andy Kearney in the imp. In his imp, we've got two imps, got the white one and this one. And the imp was a very complicated thing to build because the government of the day insisted on it being built in Scotland, whereas of course the rest of the group was down in the Midlands. So endlessly trains transporting engines and body chassis up between the Midlands and Scotland. So it was no wonder the Poor Old Roots group never made any money on the imp, and added to which it earned, rather unfairly, a reputation for unreliability. So commercially it wasn't a great success, but it makes a terrific fun hill climb car. Stephen Akers is on the hill in his Mini. Andrew Kearney, 55.39 in the pale blue imp. On the line, Gary Cox in the second of our two Scimitar GTEs. Nicely round Orchard at 57. Here's Gary Cox. And he's going to be followed by Steve Louch, sharing with John. And John has had the GTE run in the GTE already. So this is the second run for this multicoloured, it's got martini colours, hasn't it, GTE. Stephen Akers, 61.57. 61.57. So I think the quickest car in the pre-77 saloon car class was Graham Hill in the Cooper S, but I'll get confirmation of that as soon as I can. In the meantime, Steve Louch in the GTE is the last runner, and we move on to the pre-77 sports cars, kicked off by Richard Jones in this early and very, very rapid 3-litre Porsche 911. Steve Louch's time 52.08, 52.08. Here's Richard Jones, long-time experienced hill climber in this L-Reg. That's, don't ask me what year that is, but it's the 911 first appeared in 1963. So L is well in the 60s, I think. Eddie Walder, who commentates both here and at Shelsley, is probably listening. I'm sure he'll be watching and listening, and Eddie will probably correct me. All my mistakes. I'll have a long list of corrections from Eddie, for which I'm very grateful, I add hastily. Now Richard Jones has finished in the orange Porsche with 50.97, and he is followed by Brian Ashley in the first of the MGB GTs. This is the traditional hardtop MGB. Two more to come, which are soft tops but with detachable hardtops, if you know what I mean. Okay, Brian Ashley has finished in the GT with a time of 55.51, followed by Charles Bolton. These subsequent MGBs much more modified, I think, than Brian's. This one in particular is very quick, and Charles Bolton has competed in this for a long time, knows it and knows the hill like the back of his hand. And off the line goes Ted Elwes in the lovely MGA with its 2-litre engines. That's the only modification, but immaculate. Ted's car is always immaculately prepared and presented. It looks like brand new, doesn't it? Charles is finished with a 56.6. Charles Bolton in that MGB, the second of the MGBs, and the third one is on the line now in the hands of Mike Fisher. But for the time being, let's keep the focus on this lovely MGA of Ted Elwes. There was a very rare car made by Fraser Nash called the Fraser Nash Mille Miglia, which is a very pretty car, and rumour has it that the body shape of the Mille Miglia Fraser Nash was copied by BMC for the MGA. Certainly it's very similar, equally pretty. Now then, the last of our three MGBs, Mike Fisher. Charles Bolton, 56.6. Brian Ashley was quicker actually with a 55.51. Can Mike Fisher win the MGB battle? Or will it be Steve Fenner who's on the line right now? Interesting that the white powder line has survived. Of course, it's in the middle of the track, so it tends to be straddled by the wheels going past it. Mike Fisher not as quick, 61.69, 61.69. So the last of our MGBs, Steve Fenner, if I remember rightly, this left-hand drive is the quickest of the MGBs. Certainly driving it very nicely around both the Taurus and Pardon. Not easy getting from shadow into sunlight, back into shadow. It's very easy to sort of blink a bit, but Steve rapidly round the S's. Josh Sadler in the 911 3-litre RS replica. 2.33 is one of the quickest 64 feet times we've had, and 58 miles an hour, 59 miles an hour for Steve Fenner, 58 for Josh Sadler, and Steve Fenner has finished, 53.32 by some margin, the quickest of our MGBs. Josh Sadler in the Porsche, probably, I think he did a 51 first run, so probably aiming to get below 50 seconds, which would be good. In the meantime, Keith Wilson takes off in the Mark 1 MG Midget. MG Midget was the sort of posh version of the Mark 2 Sprite. 49.75 for Josh. He'll be pleased to be under the 50-second mark. And Keith Wilson's little Midget is a quick little car as well. And on the line we've got Peter Thurston, you'll see in a second or two, in the fabulous little U2, predecessor to the Malaks. Let's focus on Keith Wilson. Oh, we're going to have a look quite right at this highly polished Mark IV U2 that morphed later into the Malaks Clubman's car. Keith Wilson in the Midget, nearly completing his run, 56.87. Thurston, experienced hill climber in this almost Formula 3 spec Malak U2, but it's got a twin cam engine. Absolutely immaculately prepared, using every inch of the road quite right at the S's. We'll keep a tab on its time. Meanwhile, Phil Fisher takes off in the Mark 11 Malak. Classic, traditional Clubman's car. 46.71 for Peter Thurston. So there are just the three cars in this class. That's Peter Thurston in the U2, Phil Fisher in the Malak, and Martin Jones on the line with the Elva Mark 7. And I think Phil Fisher will be the quickest of them, but there goes this gorgeous Elva Mark 7. Elva, Frank Nichols built them down in on the Sussex coast at, I think it was Rye, wasn't it? Elva. She goes, and Elva started with front-engined Formula Junior cars and then rear-engined racing cars right up to the big bangers, the Can-Am cars and the Formula 5000 cars. Elva were a huge success, and they made lots of road cars as well. Martin Jones, Elva Mark 7, brings us into single-seaters, kicked off by the little Ensign LN3 of Mike Bainbridge. Time for Martin Jones in the Malak, 52.28. Here's the Ensign. Mentioned earlier, just switched on, Ensign built by Mo Nunn in the Midlands, and then Mo went out to the States and became very involved in IndyCar racing, particularly at Indianapolis. Prepared a lot of Indianapolis cars, and I'm sure you've got your TVs ready to record the Indy 500 this weekend. Mike Bainbridge, good time 47.39. Les Buck, winner of this championship last year, takes off in the Pringgett Mistral Formula Ford car, which he's had for a number of years, built by Messrs Pringle and Corbett, so hence Pringgett, who built 17 of these. I think Lotus rear suspension, Triumph Spitfire front suspension, which was pretty much the standard Formula Ford design. And this Mistral, the first driver of this car, I don't know if he was the owner, was Dave Morgan, and Dave went on to be a great star in Formula 3 and indeed was lined up for a works drive with Lotus. But his career rather fizzled out. He was seen as a real star of the future, but it didn't work out. Phil Chatterton has brought this delicious BT18 Brabham with its 1600cc twin cam engine, but originally would have had a 1 litre engine both for Formula 3 and the 1 litre Formula 2. Sort of car that brought Jochen Rindt to fame when he beat the likes of Graham Hill and other leading Grand Prix drivers in the Formula 2 race at Crystal Palace, and all of a sudden a star was born, and Jochen Rindt became, of course, hugely successful Formula 1 driver, but tragically died in a horrible accident at Monza. Phil Chatterton heads towards the finish, and Carol Nichols in the Nike built by her dad takes off with 2.54 for the first 64 feet. Phil's time in the Brabham 52.80, and on the line the unique Brabham BT30X in the hands of Andy Tippett, driven in period by all sorts of people: Mike McDougall, David Fife up in Scotland, Alex Brown, who still hill climbs, raced this car up in Scotland. It was a sort of thrown away development chassis that David Brabham effectively gave to Mike McDougall when he wanted to go racing and sprinting, and so it's a unique Brabham. Carol Nichols heads for the finish in the Nike 59.88, and this evening she's on her way down to another hill climb down in Devon, Prescott Park, for a meeting there, so she's got a long journey ahead of her. Andy Tippett in the BT30X with its Oldsmobile Buick power in the back that became the Rover V8 engine, but Mike McDougall installed that engine rather than the 2.5 litre Climax, which would have been a very expensive engine both to buy and to maintain. Andy finishes with a 46.39. Jez Kurzweil off the line in his Rover Mini, which is the saloon section. Only 2 cars in it, 3 drivers of the Bugatti Owners Club members, all comers. So Jez in the 1275 Rover Mini, in other words, quite a late Mini when they were called Rovers, but still pretty much the original Mini shape, with the boot lid at the back that is bottom hinged. So the idea originally was that if you had lots of luggage, you opened the boot, shoved the luggage in, and kept the boot open, and hope that it didn't all fall out. And it was also held by 2 wires, so another hope was that wires didn't break, drag the lid along the ground and leave your luggage behind. So Jez Kurzweil finishes with a 63.59, and Tom Mogurossi, who's hill climbed all sorts of things, takes off in this 1600cc little Renault Twingo, front engine, front wheel drive. Nowadays the Twingo has a little engine at the back because they've done a deal with Smart, and the current Twingo is effectively a rebodied Smart car. On the line is Michael Thompson in this lovely Honda S2000 which we'll have a look at. There it is, with the 2-litre engine with Honda's own VTEC valve system, which allows it to rev to some extraordinary, I think the red line's at 8,500 revs. But it means if you want to hustle along in an S2000, you've got to keep stirring the gear lever, but of course that's part of the fun. But don't try and overtake something in 5th gear, because below about 4,500 revs, it hardly pulls the skin off a rice pudding. Like all Hondas, beautifully built, ultra reliable, but a lot of them have had a pretty hard life. But a good one is a really good one. So Michael Thompson, round semicircle, over the finishing line at 50.53, brings us to the Elise of Austin Weltman, regular competitor both here and at other hill climbs, in the 1800cc Lotus Elise with its K-Series engine. It's the Mark I Elise, which for many people is the prettier of the Elise bodies. Mark II was easier and less expensive for Lotus to build, but the Mark I, which has echoes, if you like, of the Lotus 23, the Lotus sports racing cars, is the classic Elise. Fun to drive once you're on board, but with the hood up, as Austin's is, it's a bit of a squeeze getting in and even more of a squeeze getting out. Another MX-5 in the hands of Oliver Chilton. So this is the sports car section of the Bugatti Owners Club Members Championship. '97 Mazda MX-5. Nicely maintained, nicely presented. Oliver Chilton is rounding pardon, but Austin Weltman in the Elisa scored a 56.59. Here's the MX-5 in the S's. John Cavendish in the Sebring MGB GT on his way. Here he comes under the bridge at 54, much modified MGB. But still with the 2-litre engine, when Rover decided to fit the V8 Rover engine in the MGB, they never put it in the drop-head version. A guy called Costello, Ken Costello, was the first to put the Rover V8 engine in the MGB that gave them the idea. And here's, of course, the Costello MGB V8. They were all soft tops. Now we scroll back to 1929 to Frank Ashley in the lovely little M-type MG. MG's first midget, the MG midget, famous. There was a racing version called the C-type. The engine was really was borrowed from the Morris Minor of the period, which was funny in that the overhead camshaft was driven by a shaft that went through the vertical dynamo at the front of the engine, which was fine until it got a little bit worn, a little bit tired, when the oil used to drip down through the shaft into the dynamo, and you began to run out of sparks. But the MGM type led, of course, to the J1, J2, and then the whole line of MG midgets right up to the TF. So that's Frank Ashley well on his way. Peter Hawkey follows in the 4-cylinder Morgan, classic Morgan shape. And even the current Morgans, the 6-cylinder and the 4-cylinder Roadsters, although they've got a very modern chassis underneath, still retain the ash frame for the body and the classic Morgan shape. Morgan's, of course, built just up the road at Morven in the lee of the Morven Hills. Almost see them from here. But Simon Tarling, slightly more up to date in this immense Porsche 996 GT3. But a time for Peter Hawkey in the Morgan of 53.5. Now, what can Simon Tarling do? He wasn't competing last weekend in this car. He brought a Mitsubishi Evo, I think. So maybe the Porsche was being fettled, but it's going fine now. Off the line comes our first view of the TR7 V8 in the hands of Max Briley-Jones. Original car, originally built by Triumph with the V8 engine, made a fearsome rally car. You remember Tony Pond was one of many drivers who had great success in the V8 powered TR7. Simon Tarling in the Porsche has scored a 50.17. Bet he wishes he was 0.18 quicker and it got into the 49s, but 50.17 is a respectable time. Can it be beaten by Max Briley-Jones in the Triumph? The answer is not quite. 50.43. 50.43. Joe Neary in the Westfield with the 2-litre Vauxhall engine. Here he is. Big cage, roll cage, similar to the appearance of all the Caterhams that raced on the circuits, protecting the driver, quite right too, although it looks a bit like the fourth bridge on top, but if it keeps you safe, so much the better. Maxwell Briley-Jones, 50.43 in the Triumph, not quite as quick as Simon Tarling in the Porsche. John Bradshaw on his way in the Westfield, again with the Vauxhall engine, but 2.1 litres. Rapid car. This will be a quick run, I think. Will it be under 40 seconds? No, I don't think so, not quite. George Nurek in a much more road-going Westfield, not so highly modified, but with a 1700cc pushrod engine. 2.72 off the line and 59, not quite as quick as John Bradshaw round Orchard and under the bridge. John Bradshaw's time, very quick, 44.35. Excellent time, 44.35. I think to take this class quite comfortably. We've still got the Sebring MGB GT to see again and the TR7 V8 in the hands of Pete Fletcher. So two more cars to complete this class, but in the meantime we move back to the second driver of the Renault Twingo in the previous class. This is Richard Plug, sharing with Tom Margherossi the front-wheel drive, front-engined Twingo. Here he is. They're both of them highly experienced hill climbers. And you don't get many Twingos competing on hill climbs, so quite fun. The original Twingo was never produced in right-hand drive, so the one or two were imported into this country, but it never sold in big numbers. Here's the MGB GT, the Sebring version again, this time in the hands of David Slade. And it brings us to, if you like, the climax of the meeting, the final class, the racing cars in the Bugatti Owners Club Members Championship, but let's watch the MGB in the hands of David Slade climbing Prescott. Sun has gone for the moment. Let's hope it's back, but it doesn't look threatening. It doesn't look as if we're going to have a downpour, thank goodness. Still a bit of a breeze, but not nearly. Yesterday was ferocious wind, not too bad today. MGB, David Slade, round S's into the semicircle. We'll pick up his time in a minute, but for the moment we look at Clive Austin in the fantastic Empire Wraith with its 1 litre engine and terrific downforce with the wings. There are far fewer limitations on wings front and back than you get in circuit classes, and so you get terrific downforce in an Empire from 40 miles an hour or so, and the thing really glues itself to the road. Time for the MGB was 56.94 before we forget, but in the meantime let's watch Clive. Clive let me drive his McLaren up here a couple of times last year, which was great fun, and he heads for the finish quicker than his first run. This time it's 42.44. Andy Greenan in another Empire with not quite such advanced aerodynamics, but it's a quick car. Oof, nearly lost it, going really quickly round Orchard. Sterling Moss described Orchard Corner as one of his favourite corners on all the circuits and hills. He loved it. When he first had his Cooper 500, Sterling put an entry for a hill climb at the other place. They turned him down and said, no, never heard of you. Prescott, of course, said, you're welcome. And so Sterling's first competition with his Cooper was here at Prescott. Time we've got for Andy Greenan, 40.47, nearly 2 seconds quicker than Clive Austin. We've got his brother Adam to come, so keep an eye on Andrew's time, 40.47. Don't forget we've also got Sean Gould to come, but in the meantime we're looking at Robin Johnson in the Tigger, Super Ford 1600, going nicely, but for many people a dream car takes off from the start line. It's Ed Burgess in the lovely Type 51 Bugatti. He will straddle this little bit of mud thrown up by the previous car. Look at that classic lines of the vintage 8-cylinder straight 8 Bugatti. Gear lever and handbrake on the outside of the body. And Bugattis have an extraordinary clutch, a multiplate clutch running in oil. Straight 8 roller bearing crankshaft that in period the rollers only used to last about 1500 miles, but Colin Bullock tells me that he's had his engine unrebuilt for 10 years and still going strong. So here he is, Colin Bullock. He's following Ed Burgess, who's getting towards the finish and in fact records a good time of 53.40. Colin's equipped for road work and sports car racing with lights and mud guards, but in the period you take those off and go Grand Prix racing, and the first Monaco Grand Prix was won by a Type 35 Bugatti in the hands of Grover Williams, painted green in honour of British Racing Green. Scroll forward 80 years or so, and we got Pete Tatham in the 1300cc OMS. How things have developed in that time. We've got a time for Colin Bullock in his Type 51 Bugatti of 61.13. Pete Tatham, this has a supercharged Hayabusa engine, so 1300cc but supercharged puts him in normally in the 2 litre class on championship hill climbs. but immense power and very light. And he's followed by Murray Wakeham in another OMS. This is the first OMS with a carbon fibre tub, as opposed to Pete's, which has got a space frame, of course. But it was interesting looking with Murray at this carbon fibre tub. OMS's first go at carbon fibre. It's really thick and stiff, so probably heavier than it needs to be, but really stiff. Let's just watch Murray. Meanwhile, I've got one eye on the start line because Sean Gould has brought the fabulous Gould GR59 to the start line, and I hope we'll flick over to that. We have. There's this wonderful Gould GR59, 700 or so horsepower, 400 kilos, and the record-breaking car here at Prescott with a time of 35.41 last September. And indeed, hill climbs at other hills this year have both been won by Sean in this car. Very advanced aerodynamics, masses of downforce, Judd 4-litre V8 engine, sort that does LMP2 at Le Mans, so if it stands 24 hours of flat-out racing at Le Mans, it's not going to need a rebuild for 10 years or so of hill climbing. Now, Sean didn't quite achieve my wish of 100 miles an hour through the bridge, 95, but 37.48 is quicker than his first run, so that will certainly be fastest run of the day. Here again is the TR7 V8 in the hands of Pete Fletcher, which I think will bring our meeting to a close. So let's eye on the TR7. Thank you very much to our marshals, to our organising people who've done enormous work to allow competition to run at Prescott. Sad that we can't have spectators, but they are working on it, and hopefully in the next 4 meetings here at Prescott we will gradually allow we've got 2 more cars to come. So I'll thank other people later on, but in the meantime we've got, of course, Adam Greenan chasing brother Andy in the Empire, and I think we've got Joe Mackrell as well in the Tigger again. He's sharing with Robin Johnson. So a little bit of peace and quiet on the hill just for the moment. I can see Adam at the exit to the paddock, so he will be coming up to the start line pretty soon. In the meantime, Pete Fletcher in the TR7 V8 recorded 53.85. Adam Greenan in the lovely Empire Evo 2, 1-litre Suzuki GSXR engine in a very light car, lots of downforce. Battle of the Brothers. Adam takes off in 2.17, nearly 1 G of acceleration, 87 under the bridge. So Adam into and out of into S's, heavy braking, and then whips it through the S's into semicircle. Andy did a 4.047. Adam 39.92. Battle of the Brothers goes this weekend to Adam. And our final runner, Joe Mackrell, with the Tigger, sharing with Robin Johnson. Formula Ford car from 1983. Tim Schenken and Howden Ganley. Tigger made a great many single-seaters and World Endurance cars. Great success. Howden Ganley, New Zealander, written a brilliant book worth reading. So Joe McCrell, our final car round semicircle, 51.29. Thanks to our marshals, of course. As always, without marshals, nothing would happen. To our officials, and thank you for watching this live stream from Prescott. It'll be on YouTube. It'll stay on YouTube, so if you missed any of it, you can certainly catch it up again. But we've had lots of fun. Virtually no stoppages, only one slight whoopsie in practice, but otherwise a beautifully run meeting as always. Do join us again here at Prescott. 5th and 6th of September is our next meeting. In the meantime, happy viewing and thank you.